Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Thank you all for being here. It's an important hearing on a topic that has gone on for far too long. We had the death of one of our bravest, one of our best in Brian Terry, and this government, as I have said many, many times before, is different than most other governments in the world, and that is we are self-critical. We do look hard at things that have happened and that have gone wrong to make sure that the truth is exposed and that we don't ever make these mistakes and errors again. We are also, as a committee and staff, issuing I think it's 259-page report. I want to thank a few people, and as we get into this, I want to thank John Skladany, Steve Castor. Steve has spent an exceptional amount of time on this, as well as Tristan Levitt, who's sitting here to my left, Cordell Hull, Jack Thorland, Natalie Turner, Mike Howell, and Rebecca Edgar. A lot of people on our staff that spend countless hours working on these topics, and we thank them for their preparation of this report that we're issuing today. We're here to check in on one of the longest-running congressional oversight and investigative matters of our time, an operation called Operation Fast and Furious. Congress is now in its 7th year in search of a complete accounting of the facts relating to the reckless gun trafficking operation that left Border Patrol agent Brian Terry murdered. This happened on December 14th, 2010, and we still don't have all the answers. At the scene of Agent Terry's murder in 2010, 2 modified AK-47 type assault rifles were recovered. The weapons were traced to Operation Fast and Furious. The strategy of this failed operation, encouraged by the Department of Justice, was to focus the resources of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms on Mexican drug cartels rather than low-level straw gun purchasers. As such, a program was born that allowed straw purchasers to supply Mexican drug cartels with firearms. Purchasing a firearm for someone other than yourself is illegal. The shocking endgame of this misguided plan was to identify cartel members after guns recovered at crime scenes traced back to their original place of purchase. Absent from this strategy was any modicum of public safety. ATF failed in its mission to protect our communities from violent criminals and the illegal use of trafficking of firearms. Let's keep in mind, these were nearly 2,000 weapons that they knowingly and willingly let out onto the streets. Agent Terry's family, who's here and will participate in the second panel, should not have to wait more than 6 years for answers and accountability. We're grateful they're here, and we look forward to hearing their story again in the second panel. Our committee began its work in February 2011 under the leadership of Chairman Darrell Issa. After partnering with Senator Grassley to evaluate unfathomable whistleblower accounts and documents coming out of ATF in Phoenix, Arizona. Both Chairman Grassley and Chairman Issa helped lead the charge, and we're very grateful for their efforts and look forward to hearing more from both today. Several Phoenix-based ATF special agents expressed skepticism and disbelief about the program as it went against everything they were trained to do and violated their law enforcement oath to protect the public. Special Agent John Dodson, who is with us today, was one of those agents. Without Agent Dodson's determination to do the right thing, surely many more thousands of firearms would have walked, leading to additional deaths. He should be thanked, I should say, by the Department of Justice, the ATF, and by all of us. But as Agent Dodson will tell us today, a different story, however, happened. His employer was not treating him as a hero. As the committee with the responsibility for oversight of federal whistleblower policy, we must continue to shine the light on John Dodson's story. The congressional investigation also led to a well-chronicled impasse between 2 equal branches of government. In June 2012, the House of Representatives held former Attorney General Eric Holder in contempt for failing to turn over documents relating to the investigation. The House successfully compelled the production of many of these documents in federal court. In 2 separate judicial victories, the committee received approximately 80,000 pages of new documents from the Department of Justice. And again, the Department of Justice didn't want Congress to see them and certainly didn't want the public to see them. However, it should not take years and endless expensive litigation for the executive branch to cooperate with proper congressional oversight. We still require additional documents, and litigation is ongoing as DOJ, the Department of Justice, continues its unprecedented stonewalling of Congress and the Terry family. And I'm sorry to report, under the Trump administration, this has not changed. This has not changed. In previous testimony before Congress, former Attorney General Holder committed to getting the Terry family the answers and explanations they needed. But when the television lights went off, that did not happen. In fact, the opposite happened. The Obama administration Justice Department went so far as to litigate against the Terry family. The Justice Department wrote briefs and argued in federal court against the family's efforts to intervene as a crime victim in the Fast and Furious prosecutions. It's a travesty of justice. We look forward to hearing from Senator Grassley, Special Agent Dodson, and members of Brian Terry's family, including his mother and his cousin, Robert Heyer. We look forward to hearing their accounts and perspectives from a vantage point 6 years later. But right now, we're pleased to have serving as the ranking member today, Mr. Lynch, the gentleman from Massachusetts, and we'll yield as much time as he needs. Mr. Lynch, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Grassley, you honor us by your presence here this morning. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the life and courageous service of Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry, who served as a United States Marine, a police officer in his home state of Michigan, and an agent of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. His life was tragically cut short when he was murdered in a gunfight near the Mexican border in 2010. Agent Terry's family is here today. Mrs. Terry and Mr. Heyer, we are deeply sorry for your loss. Ranking Member Cummings very much wanted to be here today, but as many of you know, he is recuperating from heart surgery. But he wanted me to extend his apologies for not being here personally today. He was able to speak with Agent Terry's family last month, and he offered to see if there was anything more we could do here on this committee to obtain additional information about what happened nearly 7 years ago. As part of that effort, Ranking Member Cummings wrote a letter to Attorney General Jeff Sessions on May 30th asking whether the Department of Justice still had the same policy about producing documents to Congress that it had under the Obama administration. Years ago, this, as the chairman has laid out, this committee had a high-profile disagreement with the Justice Department. Although it produced a great deal of information to the committee, it withheld certain information based on the argument that the federal agencies have a so-called deliberative process privilege. That issue was indeed litigated, and the court found that agencies do in fact have this privilege, but that there were some additional documents that were outside of the privilege that should be produced even when applying that principle. Following the court's order, the department provided the committee with access to thousands of pages of additional documents last summer. In his letter to Attorney General Sessions, Ranking Member Cummings again asked whether the department policy on these documents is the same as it was under the Obama administration. He asked whether Attorney General Sessions is now asserting the same privilege that Attorney General Holder and the Obama administration did, or whether Attorney General Sessions has changed these policies to provide additional documents to the committee. Ranking Member Cummings shared his letter with Agent Terry's family members, and Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that we place this May 30th letter from Mr. Cummings to Attorney General Sessions into the official record for today's hearing.
Without objections, so ordered.
Unfortunately, the department responded on Monday that it will not provide us with answers to the ranking member's questions. It will not explain whether the Attorney General is changing the department's policies or legal interpretations, and it declined to send anyone here today to testify about these questions. Instead, the department informed us that it is continuing to discuss these matters with the chairman. Because Democrats have not been invited to participate in those discussions, we have no idea whether Attorney General will let us have any of these remaining documents at this point. This also raises a second problem. Last week, the White House directed a new policy that federal agencies should ignore requests for information from members of Congress other than Republican committee chairmen. This new policy relies on an opinion from the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel, which claims that the authority to conduct oversight, quote, may be exercised only by each House of Congress or under existing delegations by committee and subcommittees or their chairman, and that individual members of Congress do not have the authority to conduct oversight in the absence of a special delegation by a full House committee or subcommittee. That analysis is indeed wrong. It flies in the face of Supreme Court precedent, and it is a mistake. The great irony here is that we have the Honorable Senator Grassley testifying before us today, and he was responsible, I believe, for first bringing Operation Fast and Furious to light in 2011. And at the time, Senator Grassley was not a committee chairman. He was in the minority. But we congratulate him on his diligence and hard work. The Trump administration should acknowledge and respect the constitutional oversight role of every member of Congress, regardless of party, because we do our oversight in service of the American people, not on behalf of political parties, like the Terry family. As Senator Grassley wrote in a letter back in 2009 about the role of the minority, quote, as a senior member of the United States Senate and the ranking member of the Committee on Finance Committee, I have a duty under the Constitution to conduct oversight into the actions of executive branch agencies. Senator Grassley was right. Finally, I want to address an issue that was raised by the Terry family. When Americans are killed in the line of duty, as Agent Terry was, their family members deserve our support. And today I'm asking that the Department of Justice review its policies and procedures for supporting the families of those who lose their lives in service to our country. I hope the Chairman and other members of the committee will join me in that request, and by working to ensure that the victims' families are supported, we can honor Agent Terry's legacy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of our time.
I thank the gentleman. I would simply note that I actually concur with your notion that if the Department of Justice is taking a position that they should not respond, but only respond to chairman. I think that is a dangerous and unsustainable policy, and so I just want you to know that I concur with you. I want members to know we'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We'd now like to recognize our distinguished witness on the first panel, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. But in order to properly introduce him, I'd like to recognize a colleague, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, as well as Mr. Ice after that. Mr. Blum, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure today to introduce my friend and fellow Iowan Senator Charles Grassley. Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Grassley recently began serving his 7th term in the United States Senate. The former chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Grassley, also served in the Iowa House and the U.S. House before coming to the Senate. Senator Grassley has been an important partner to this committee in fast and furious investigation, and we're privileged to have him join us today. As co-chairman of the Senate Whistleblower Protection Caucus, he's a tireless advocate for whistleblowers, including Special Agent John Dodson. This investigation has shown the important role whistleblowers play in enabling Congress to conduct oversight of the executive branch. After unsuccessfully raising his concerns within the Department of Justice, Special Agent Dodson contacted Senator Grassley's office in 2011. In January of that year, Senator Grassley wrote a letter to the ATF regarding the allegations and later partnered with this committee to better understand the Fast and Furious operation and determine if there was any wrongdoing, abuse of authority, or failed supervision. During that investigation, the Justice Department falsely denied that law enforcement officers had allowed straw purchasers to buy firearms illegally and trafficking them without being apprehended, directly contradicting the claims of whistleblowers. The Department of Justice was later forced to withdraw their denial. Armed with information provided by whistleblowers, Senator Grassley and this committee have continued to press Department of Justice for documents related to Fast and Furious, resorting to the court system when necessary. Senator, I thank you for being with us today. We appreciate your hard work on this matter and are looking forward to your testimony today. Thank you for being here, and I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Mr. Isef.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this special honor. I'll be brief. Chuck, thank you. You know, many on this dais here were not in Congress when you began your effort 6+ years ago, and apparently many don't understand that you were in the minority and they were seeking not to, in fact, cooperate. And it was through a partnership with your staff, which were excellent and added so much to this committee, with your use of, although minority, your voting capability, my ability to write subpoenas, and then the leadership's willingness to go all the way to contempt, that we are here today with what we know, knowing that we don't know everything. So I join with the chairman and today's ranking member in saying, yes, I believe the minority should be heard and should be reasonably answered. I would say, though, that our great partnership, one that I will cherish, started with their assumption that they would give you a lie as a letter, and then for 10 dogged months stick by that lie, and only with your tenacity were we able to get beyond that. So I'm just happy to be able to thank you today, Senator.
Thank the gentleman. Again, Senator Grassley, we're honored to have you here as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. The time is now yours, sir.
Those are very kind introductions. Thank you very much. And before I read, I would like to thank Chairman Chaffetz and Ranking Member Lynch, not only for the opportunity to appear here, but also I listened to your remarks about two things, whistleblowing and oversight, and they're kind of connected. And I want Mr. Lynch to know that I still stand by my 2009 letter. And I'm glad that everybody else so far that has spoken on this committee realizes that sometimes you're in the majority and sometimes you're in the minority. There's a process that has to be available. So I'm going to be responding in a letter to the White House in a day or two to those recommendations they put out, that I disagree with them and why I disagree with them. And I think a new phrase in this town is very appropriate for what this issue is all about, because the word drain the swamp doesn't necessarily mean fire people or get rid of organizations. It means change the culture in this town. And one of the cultures is, whether you have Republican or Democrat presidents, the bureaucracy is sometimes embarrassed by what they do, and we want to expose it. And we want to expose it because transparency brings accountability. And accountability is very important if you work for the American taxpayers. The second thing I would say deals with the word whistleblower. Mr. Dotson is one example of how whistleblowers are treated both in Republican and Democrat administrations. And I suggest to this president, as I've suggested to other presidents, that what we need is once a year a Rose Garden ceremony honoring some whistleblowers, so that the bureaucracy, which is permanent, and presidents and members of Congress are not permanent, that from the top of the bureaucracy, in other words, the chief executive, all the way down to whatever you want to consider the job in the lower end of the bureaucracy, that whistleblowing is a political, a patriotic thing and the right thing to do, and that they ought to be honored. Normally, how are they treated by a bureaucracy, not just in ATF, not just in the Justice Department, but almost throughout the bureaucracy? They're treated like a skunk at a picnic, and that's wrong. And government's less off for it when we have that attitude. I would like to proceed, so I hope you haven't started the clock yet.
The way of the Senate, absolutely.
Thank you for inviting me to testify about an important congressional investigation that the Justice Department has stonewalled for far too long, Operation Fast and Furious. This investigation began 6 years ago. The fact that it is still tied up in the courts is proof positive that our system of checks and balances is broken. Congress needs to reform its process for enforcing compliance with subpoenas. It all started when courageous agents blew the whistle on gun walking to the Senate Judiciary Committee. We learned that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives sanctioned the illegal sale of hundreds of assault weapons to straw purchasers, who then trafficked the guns to Mexican cartels. These weapons have since been discovered in the hands of criminals, both within the United States and Mexico. 2 of these weapons were used in the firefight that led to the tragic death of Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry in December 2010. After it became clear that the government planned to cover it up, agents, patriotic agents, blew the whistle. On January 27, 2011, I wrote to ATF for answers. But the Department of Justice and ATF had no intention looking for honest answers and being transparent. In fact, from the very onset, bureaucrats employed shameless delay tactics to obstruct the investigation. In a letter to me, February 4th, 2011, department officials denied that ATF had ever walked guns, but the evidence kept mounting that the official denial was just plain false. Through documents obtained during this long litigation, we have learned how the bureaucrats and even political appointees reacted when they learned the truth. As the department became aware that the information it provided to Congress was wrong, it kept the truth hidden. DOJ refused to come clean, refused to notify Congress, and refused to correct the record. As soon as March 11th, officials at ATF and within the department raised concerns about the inaccuracy of the information provided to me in that February 4th letter. But the department still failed to withdraw the letter until 9 months later in December, thus admitting they lied to a U.S. senator or to the United States Senate. Why did it take so long then to admit the truth to Congress? Our two committees requested documents from the department that would shed light on the delay. October 2011, this House committee issued a subpoena for documents from the Department of Justice, including documents related to the department's response to Congress. The department initially refused to produce any documents responses to the subpoena. It refused to assert any privilege at that time or provide a log of withheld documents so that this committee could consider whether there were any legitimate reasons for not providing those documents. Instead, the department merely made vague, feeble claims that the documents implicated words we're acquainted with, confidentiality interests, or another words were separate that they used as an excuse, separation of power concerns. Then the ridiculous happened. In June 2012, the Justice Department had to ask President Obama to give it some cover by formally asserting executive privilege. The request came on the eve of a vote in this committee to hold the Attorney General in contempt. And the President's assertion was communicated to this committee only minutes before the scheduled vote. The committee rejected the President's claim on the merits, and so did the full House in a historic bipartisan vote because it was the first time an Attorney General was held in contempt of Congress. But to add to the obstruction, the Obama administration refused to present the contempt citation to a grand jury as required by statute. Then in August 2012, this committee filed a civil lawsuit to try and enforce its subpoena that way. Once in the courts, even more lengthy delays then began. 2 years later, August 2014, the court finally ordered the department to review all the documents, provide a log explaining why it wanted to withhold specific items, and to produce everything that the department itself admitted was not covered by any privilege. The department then produced more than 10,000 of the original withheld documents. These documents totaled about 64,000 pages. To be clear, and this is very important, the department tried to hide these documents from Congress by getting President Obama to assert executive privilege. But once the case was before a judge, the president then totally abandoned that claim. In effect, the government admitted that this privilege did not apply to those documents. Why did it take a contempt citation from Congress to force the executive branch to finally admit that it hid documents from people's representative for completely bogus reasons. Attorney General Holder preferred to be held in contempt rather than admit the authority of this committee to compel production of the documents through a subpoena, even documents that the Justice Department and the President did not believe were privileged. If that doesn't illustrate how broken our system of congressional subpoena enforcement is, then I don't know what does. The capitulation of the department, once a judge finally forced its hand, proves that the initial claim of privilege that those claims were deceptive and unfounded. It was nothing more than an attempt to obstruct Congress's constitutional responsibility of oversight and this investigation. The department's belated admission that those 64,000 pages were not privileged puts the gold seal of authenticity on the House's bipartisan vote to hold the Attorney General in contempt. The documents expose the Justice Department's intent to hide information from Congress and upsets the balance of powers. Obstructing a valid inquiry by a separate co-equal branch of government undermines our constitutional system of checks and balances. The documents show a highly politicized climate at the Obama administration's main justice, focused more on spin and cover-up than on transparency and fact-finding. Now, despite the court's orders to the department to produce documents that were admittedly not privileged, the judge's opinion as a whole is problematic, and we have to take a good look at that. Although the judge also later ordered the production of more material, the judge's reasoning is fatally flawed. The judge erroneously concluded that certain of the department's underlying privilege claims, although waived, were valid. The judge gave the House a victory in practice, but gave the department a victory on principle. By splitting the baby in this way, the opinion seeks for the first time to push the scope of executive privilege outside the White House to cloak low-level government bureaucrats in secrecy. This is new and unprecedented territory. It is a major threat to the oversight powers of the legislative branch. The President should not be able to shield information in all the vast agencies and departments of government from congressional scrutiny. If it has nothing to do with the advice to the President by his advisors, then why should it be privileged? That is why the House must push forward with its appeal to get the district court's opinion overturned. The so-called deliberative process privilege is no constitutional privilege at all. It is common law doctrine and a statutory exception under the Freedom of Information Act only. It only applies to discussions about the formulation of policy and only before a final policy decision has been made. The privilege should not extend to allow the department to hide its internal communications about responding to Congress. These communications were not to or from the President, and now we know that they largely focused on obstructing Congress and strategizing to avoid negative press coverage. These communications can hardly be characterized as forming Department of Justice policy, as the judge wants us to think, and should not even be protected by the deliberative process statutory exemption, let alone some new form of executive privilege. Now, this litigation has been ongoing for a long time. The American people, including this Terry family, the Terry family, they're right here. They're right here to remind us of what government can do that's illegal and get away with it. They remind us of what can be done when whistleblowers that are politically conscious or patriotically conscious come forward. So let me start again. The American people, including the Terry family here with us today, deserve a complete accounting for questions posed in this investigation that began with people coming to me in 2011. It has been, as we've repeated so many times, 6 long years. We are still waiting. But this is not just about documents in Fast and Furious. This case also must be considered from the perspective of the institutional role of Congress of oversight. So, I urge you all to take off your partisan hats for a moment. Imagine if the shoe were on the other foot. This case has broad implications for the ability of elected representatives of the American people to do our constitutional duty to act as a check on the executive branch of government. Clearly, Congress needs to do something. It cannot take years for this body to get answers from a co-equal branch of government about information that has no legal basis to stay hidden from the representatives of the American people, and a proper check to make sure that the executive branch does its job of duly enforcing the law. That is why I am working with my colleagues on proposals to modernize the rules of engagement in congressional oversight. We need a package of rules and legislative changes so that responders to congressional inquiries cannot rely on phony, privileged claims and delay tactics. These changes will make it easier for members of Congress to get the information they need to do their job for the American people that pay them and who they represent. So I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues in both the Senate and the House on these proposals, and hope you will all join me. I thank you for allowing me to appear, but more importantly, we would not be where we are today because in 2011, I was not a chairman of a committee, and those excuses were used against me as this administration is using those excuses once again. So this committee was in the majority, and we had a chairman and a committee members that were willing to pursue this, and thank God you were in the majority at that time, or we still may not have any information. Thank you very much.
Chairman Grassley, thank you. We appreciate your time. We know I have an obligation in the Senate at 10, and by mutual agreement and concurrence with the minority, the committee is now going to go into recess. The committee's in recess.
Thank you.